So this is the percent proportion, and we are going to solve problems using percents, using the formula of is over of is equal to percent over 100. Our first example is just going to be a review of how to solve proportions using cross products. So to do that, I take 36 times 100, and I set it equal to 48 times x. Well, 36 times 100 is 3,600, and yes, you may use calculators to do this if you need it. And 48 times x we just rewrite as 48x. Then, if you remember, I divide by what is in front of my variable. And 3,600 divided by 48 is going to be 75. 48 divided by 48, if you remember from our fractions review, reduces to 1, and I am just left with 75 is equal to x. And then I circle my answer. So that's how I solve a basic proportion. Again, we're going to be doing percent proportions, and that means that we are going to be looking at part over whole is equal to percent over 100, and our part is referred to as our is, and our whole is found by looking at the word of. So let's take our first example, and it says 25 is what percent of 130. So when I know that I am dealing with a percent problem, and I'm going to solve it using ratios, my bottom right is always 100 because percent literally means out of 100. And then I'm going to read my problem and I'm going to look for where to fill in the rest of my ratio. So it says 25 is. Well, if we remember, our ratio is over of is equal to percent over 100. So 25 is going to go right there. And it says, is what percent of 130? Well, of 130, of goes in the numerator. And it's literally asking me what percent, so that is where I'm going to put my P for percent, or you can use an X. Once I set up my ratio, now it's just a matter of using cross products to find my answer. So 25 times 100 is 2,500, or 2,500. 130 times P is just 130 P. And then to get the percent by itself, I divide by 130. I get that my answer is 19.2 is equal to P. As I'm looking for percent, I have to rewrite it with the percent. So my answer is 19.2%. The key to solving problems with percent proportion is to set it up correctly and then find our cross products. What is 135% of 60? So again, I'm going to set up my percent proportion. I always put 100 in the bottom right because percent is always out of 100. In this case, I am given the percent is 135. So whatever the percent is goes on top of the 100. Even if it's more than 100, it still goes on top because I can have more than 100% of something. Now it's asking me what is. So that should tell you what is over of, so my x, or my variable, is going to be here, and of 60, 60 goes in the denominator. Another way to look at it is what part of 60, or the whole, is equal to 135%. And again, from this point, once I set it up, I just use cross products, and I get 100 times x is equal to 60 times 135, which is 8,100. this just becomes 100x. And when I divide both sides by 100, you can use a calculator, but you should recognize that I can also cancel out zeros, and x is just 81. And it makes sense that 81 is bigger than 60 because 135 is bigger than 100. And then I'm going to circle my final answer. Here is our last example. 14 is 20% of what number? So again, I'm going to set up my ratio, and 100 is going to be in the bottom right. It's literally telling me right here what my percent is. I always like to start with my percent because that's guaranteed. Then it tells us 14 is. So 14 is goes in the numerator because it's is over of. And in this case, it's asking me of what number. Well, I don't know what number, so I would just call that x. And again, as with our last few examples, once it is set up, I just use cross products to find my answer. 14 times 100 is equal to 20 times x, which is just 20x. I get 1,400, and then I divide both sides by 20 to get my variable by itself. This reduces to 1, and 1,400 divided by 20 gives me 70. And I can see that my answer makes sense because my denominator in this case should be more than my numerator.
Don't forget, we're going to be using the relationship of is over of is equal to percent over 100, or part over whole is equal to percent over 100 to solve percent problems using proportions.